Giving myself or finding a North Star metric for trust has something I've been trying for years to do, and I have not found it.
Most definitely. And on this podcast as well, we talk about a lot of the negatives, right?
Well, I know you're smart enough to be using a keychain for all of your passwords.
Yeah, it's not enough, is it?
No, it's not.
Where do we draw the lines?
When the machines become the humans.
Hello, dear listeners, and welcome back to What the Fraud, a podcast by Sumsub where digital fraudsters meet their match. My name is Thomas Taraniak, and I'm currently responsible for some of our very exciting partnerships here at Sumsub, the global verification platform helping to verify users, businesses, and of course, transactions as well. On this podcast, we often talk about the risks fraud poses to your trust, your customers, and your bottom line. But today, we want to take a more positive look at the upside of strong security, how trust can become a company's competitive edge. The rapid growth of AI is offering businesses all sorts of opportunities, but it is also bringing new challenges. So the time is now to build trust at every level of your company, giving customers the confidence to take on new technologies. And we could think of no one better to talk to than Carolyn Fox, Director of Trust and Security at the global tech leader Telus Digital. With years of experience working at some of the biggest names in technology, including Yelp and Snapchat, Carolyn knows how crucial trust can be to a company's success and why it can be one of the most important functions your business can build. Carolyn, thank you so much for joining us today. Great to have you on the Sumsub What the Fraud podcast. And of course, you've got a remarkable CV and now working at Telus Digital. Would love to hear from you around the world of trust, safety, and how you've actually made a career out of it as well.
Unintentionally, I think, like a lot of people in this industry, I went to school for international business because it sounded cool, and I thought I could get paid to travel, and it did work out. But I got my first tech job in trust and safety at a company called Yelp. I was based in San Francisco. Tech was what all the cool kids were doing. I wanted to get in on that, and at the time we didn't call it trust and safety. It was, reviewing angry reviews. So I started as a content moderator, worked my way up to being responsible for the data integrity on all of our business listings. Okay. So I got really good at, picking out a fake locksmith listing. I applied to Snapchat on a whim for their trust and safety team to scale their operational outsourcing for trust and safety. I got the job, moved to LA, and they were in a rapid scale-up phase, so we needed to wear a lot of hats really quickly. I did everything from policy to process design to, global strategy and footprint. That's where I fell into a lot of the fraud-type work around identity operations and account takeovers. There were a lot of phishing scams happening even back then. I worked with Telus as a client at the time. They were my vendor, or one of my vendors, and I really liked the culture, really liked a lot of the people and some of the stuff they were doing, particularly in the financial crimes and compliance space and identity protection. And I saw an opportunity to grow in a way that I felt was really interesting. And I joined the company a little over 2 years ago. So that's how I wound up where I am now.
Amazing to hear. Amazing to hear. And Yelp, of course, a very US-based company, and Snap Incorporated as well.
Yes.
Snap Inc. Both of these players, I imagine, have a huge footprint in the digital space, of course.
Very much so.
Loads and loads of users. Does that also mean loads and loads of fraud as well? You mentioned phishing.
Yes. Account takeovers were a huge issue at Snap. Less of an issue at Yelp, although it was a problem. The bigger issue at Yelp was fake reviews and farmed reviews that there was a pretty robust algorithm to try and tackle.
Right, so you're using algorithms back then. I imagine AI is having a big impact now. But was it very much manual, big teams, and of course a lot of working hours?
Absolutely. This was global teams, hundreds of people, thousands of people at Snap all over the world that were responsible for, monitoring the integrity of whether at Yelp it was business listings, at Snap it was content at all times, 24/7 operations.
Oh, wow, that's crazy. Yeah. And of course, keeping the business 24/7 protected is important as well. I mean, Telus Digital, of course, works in a very different space, but many different areas as well, right? How do you tailor your fraud strategy currently across such a diverse ecosystem of different verticals and different regions for different purposes, from telecommunications, let's say, all the way to digital identity and payments?
A lot of the basics remain the same, no matter what sort of platform or type of business you're working at. Basic account protections, two-factor authentication, encouraging separate passwords for it. There's biometric verification. A lot of those are the same, but even on the back end in cybersecurity, the things you're looking at, the signifiers for anomalous behaviors are going to be the same. Are you logging in from a different device? Are you logging in from a different IP? Are you doing transactions or actions that are very unusual for this type of user? So those are often quite similar across whether you're talking about a social media company, an e-commerce platform, or a bank. Then you have to lean in and get specific for specific markets. And this is where sort of the privacy versus risk versus security argument comes into play. If you're dealing with somebody who's trying to set up a Fortnite account, you're not going to have the same level of security and protections as you are for somebody who's trying to set up a Western Union account where they'll be transferring tens of thousands of dollars across international borders.
Makes a lot of sense. Unregulated versus regulated. Yes. Of course, there's going to be a lot of different protective measures, but also fraud can be easy on one sense versus the other. And I mean, from your perspective, what sort of challenges are you seeing, such as your team, let's say, is seeing when you're trying to incorporate trust and safety throughout a business that you're working with at Telus Digital? How can businesses overcome these challenges by working with you?
Well, we offer a lot of platform solutions and partner with a lot of platforms like yourselves at Sumsub to be able to help integrate digital solutions into it. And we're able to offer them sort of all in one as one package rather than having to go to 6 different suppliers to be able to get a solution. And we're also able to provide advice and best practices of what our clients are doing, how they've probably had similar challenges, even some of the big massive name platforms that you think of have had, major issues with these. So I think the knowledge and the industry information we're able to provide is super valuable.
Can trust and safety also sometimes be a little bit of a roadblock when it comes to, companies trying to grow, trying to scale as well from your perspective? I mean, someone trying to come in and, inherently maybe slow things down from an outside view, right? That's not what we're trying to do at the end of the day. From your perspective, how do you shift that perception and your position as a team, let's say, growth enabler, rather than someone who's going to hinder that growth?
Yeah, it's a huge challenge. You have sort of your trust and safety teams are like the internal police in the industry, and often are seen as roadblocks. I would say that perception just because of the issues that have been arising, a lot of high publicity data breaches, a lot of high publicity security incidents. I think, especially at executive levels, people have more awareness of the risk now than they did 5-10 years ago. So some of that narrative is already changing. But there, when you want to roll out a new product and you have somebody saying, no, we have to, check all of these boxes before we can do that, it can certainly cause some friction in a business. I mean, convincing people with data is always, tells a really compelling story. And there are tons of data points on fraud. You talk about the rise of fraud in the US, 2023 to 2024, it's grown 25% for consumer-based fraud. It's tens of billions of dollars, and that's just what's reported. There's plenty of other fraud that goes unreported. So there's plenty of data to back things up and to help tell a compelling story. We also know that there's intangible costs associated with fraud in terms of churn and losing users, losing trust. There's, especially in the tech space and the platform space, there's a ton of other disruptive brands out there. So if you're not keeping your customers safe, if you're not protecting their trust, there are other options for them to go to. So these stories really help, I think, move the needle and change perceptions internally in organizations.
Definitely. And it's definitely underreported as well in terms of the grandiose scheme of things. From your perspective, you mentioned the technologies there. I mean, you work at the forefront of so many different new technologies at Telus Digital as well, right? Is there a unique, let's say, fraud profile or risk profile associated with these new technologies, releasing them? And how do you adapt to that as well?
I mean, it's huge. It's absolutely needed. I don't necessarily think it has to be about balance as long as your real-time detection isn't storing some of that more sensitive data. So a lot of these platforms aren't holding on to any data aside from some of the basics. So biometric data, for instance, they're not holding on to that. That's not being stored. So I don't necessarily think it has to be a trade-off. I think the bigger challenge is implementing friction into the system. If I have to do 3 levels of verification to buy something on Amazon, I might just give up and go to a store and pick it up. I think that's sort of the bigger issue as long as you are transparent about what data you're collecting and not storing anything beyond what you need to.
Absolutely. And especially for non-regulated businesses, if they don't need to put friction in the flow, they won't. Every business pretty much out there is for profit, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, they want to acquire as many customers as possible, and to be sticky and to be attractive, they have to make it easy.
Well, that's actually coming back to bite a lot of them too, is not putting friction in the flow. Is if you're not putting the right kind of friction in the flow or the right kind of measurements in the flow, every platform-based business, everything that facilitates some sort of online transaction is also seeing a huge rise in fraud, is also seeing a huge rise in account takeovers. Even if you're a food delivery app, and not a major money processor, you're still having those issues. And if the customer has their stored credit card data and there's not some sort of secondary verification to make sure that, you're not paying £250 for somebody to get across Southern England, then it happens. It happens all the time.
Most definitely. And on this podcast as well, we talk about a lot of the negatives, right? We'd love to spin that on its head today, because I would love to hear from your perspective, what are some of the advantages that you see of having, let's say, a well-integrated trust and safety protocol or team within an organization?
I mean, I think these teams are utterly critical to the success of an organization. If you don't have a well-integrated trust and safety organization, you're losing out on an entire key point of feedback and customer sentiment and customer behavior, visibility into how your customers are engaging with your platform. So this whole chain of feedback is absolutely essential to the success of a customer. In the financial services space, an example that popped up fairly recently was the customer support teams was noticing they were getting an increase in contacts from customers whose identities were auto-rejected by the AI for sort of a poor fine-tuning of that function. And they were able to feed that back to the KYC team, and that was able to then, look into these and find out they were actually really erroneous rejections. All of these people should be onboarded as customers, and then feed that back into the AI and reduce that churn rate, reduce that rejection rate. So, I mean, that's just one example, but having these teams well integrated means you're getting much more insights into consumer behavior. You're able to get ahead of risks before they become massive challenges by monitoring trends. So yeah, I would say it's absolutely essential.
I can imagine fine-tuning and continuous improvement, especially when you're talking about massive organizations, segmented matrix teams. It's very difficult for the communicative, let's say, side, specifically around, of course, sharing problems and then finding solutions around fraud and those issues as well. From your perspective and experience, I mean, from Yelp to, of course, Snap and then Telus, what does an effective, unified framework and team look like, which is maybe even multifaceted at Telus now? How do you scale that as well across different teams?
I think in full transparency, nobody has perfected it.
There's no silver bullet
there
yet.
is no silver bullet. If we did, somebody would be making a lot of money writing books on it. It's a really complex challenge, especially because we're operating in a global 24/7 environment, and companies are still structured to have at senior levels sort of a single point of failure as a decision maker, and that can be a huge challenge. So I think enabling sort of deputies in organizations to be able to make decisions, to drive things forward, and making sure you have decision makers in different geos working closely with all of these teams is a big component. Open, transparent communication, sometimes forced communication that sometimes doesn't seem necessary. Sometimes meetings that could have been an email really should be a meeting, because having that FaceTime is super important. I think wherever it's possible, in-person visits are super important. I know a lot of companies are cutting travel costs right now, but getting people in geos working with the people that you just see on a screen, from the shoulder up or just see in emails, those things are all super helpful. And then creating clear swim lanes and matrices in these organizations to define who owns what. You don't want to be chasing around 6 different people to be able to find a decision maker, to be able to know who you're supposed to talk to. So making sure you have a good knowledge base and a workforce management system or workforce directory to be able to empower people to be able to speak to the people they need to get their jobs done is really important.
And speaking up to really big point here. We had a podcast with Mark previously, and we were speaking about employee fraud, right?
Yeah.
Within organizations. And when we're looking at what COVID's done to us, specifically within, let's say, the tech space, of course, digital nomad living and work from home has had a massive impact as well. Would you say, in terms of the scale of the company, the scale of the problem can be different as well?
I think the risk of fraud, whether you're in a large organization or a small organization, is significant regardless. Small organizations can be flexible and lean and adapt to challenges a little bit faster than some large ones, but you're also dealing with a resource-constrained environment. A lot of your sort of back-end processes tend to be more manual and therefore subject to human error and missing important components, right? They're, not always able to have the budget to implement some of the more complex technical solutions. And then for a larger company, certainly a household name, they're often more frequently targeted, and then the material impact of what can happen. And again, you have these distributed teams that don't necessarily always talk to each other. Functions can happen in silos, and that also opens up risk.
Most definitely. We've been talking about how trust isn't just a nice to have. It's a strategic advantage, and one that can drive growth, reduce churn, and set companies apart in a crowded digital market. At Sumsub, we're not just talking about trust. We're building infrastructure that powers it. And this November, we're bringing the global fraud fighting community together at the What the Fraud Summit in Singapore, November 19th and 20th. This year's theme, turning trust into a competitive edge. So we're gathering the leaders from fintech, AI, telecom, crypto, and compliance to dig into the real-world strategies that help companies scale securely, compliantly, and win customer confidence, all while navigating an evolving threat landscape. No hype, no jargon, just 2 days of sharp insight, honest conversations, and practical frameworks you can take back to your team. Expect 50 or more expert speakers, 500 plus attendees, including namely C-suite people, and hands-on workshops that tackle the toughest trust and safety challenges head-on. Ready to join the front line of fraud prevention? Secure your spot now at sumsub.com/WTF-summit or hit the link in the episode's description today. Safety plays an important role in the bottom line of small and large businesses alike. I guess we can agree on that, right? And there was an interesting point in 2024 where IBM basically said on their research division that they found an average cost of data breaches rose to $4.9 million, 10% increase from the year before. And even in the last few weeks as well, we've heard stories from major retailers such as Marks and Spencer's in the UK, the North Face and Cartier as well, which are now grappling with massive cyber attacks, right? So they're not just targeting tech companies, they're targeting merchants and, of course, consumer goods companies as well. I mean, from your perspective at Telus, how can companies deal with what's becoming a global threat to small businesses, large businesses, anywhere?
Lock down your databases. I mean, I think a lot of, especially some of these larger legacy companies have really outdated systems for tracking things. And especially companies that are, grew through acquisitions, a lot of these things might be siloed and you don't have systems that talk to each other. So I do think there's a massive need for companies to update sort of how they're protecting consumer data and how they're storing their data. And the other component is sort of what we were talking about earlier. Companies that regulated and haven't historically dealt with wide-scale fraud are reluctant to add friction into systems to be able to protect their customers. And there does need to be a balance there. But I think any platform or any business where you can access your account without two-factor authentication, already a huge risk. And that's just the absolute bare minimum that anyone should be doing. And a lot of these, I mean, I know half of the clothing apps or accounts I have, which is more than I'd like to admit. I can log in. You can use a password that's reshared on a bunch of different platforms or for a bunch of different accounts, and there's not much safety. And the requirements for passwords are even, 8 letters or 8 characters, 1 letter, or 1 letter, 1 number, and uppercase.
It's not enough, is it?
No, it's not.
And I don't know if you get this as well, but I do get on my iPhone the release of a password risk, where basically it says, okay, you've been exposed to this amount of, exposure from, let's say, data leaks and password leaks as well, and I have to go through all of them. And sometimes it's a big hit with like 100 different accounts. It's awful.
Well, I know you're smart enough to be using a keychain for all of your passwords,
yes,
and definitely don't have things that are easy to remember, words or letters or numbers.
Well, yeah, it's the auto-suggested Apple one, right? So it's nigh impossible to break, right?
Yeah.
But it's always a bit scary where there's
when you found out you're in a breach. Yeah, I think most of the major U.S. ones that have happened in the last decade have impacted me. So
really,
yeah.
Oh, there was the massive social security number.
There was that. Well. Yeah. I mean, further back, you're talking Marriott Starwood, which anyone who travels a lot probably has some of their data with them. Target. These ones all had massive consumer impacts.
Do you have any experience in, of course, that realm of things, just around how that data is aggregated by criminals and then used to, of course, create a big profile of yourself, let's say, and gain access maybe to other accounts which are maybe in digital financial services and can actually have a real impact on your life?
I can't say I have a full in-depth breadth like somebody who, works in the FBI and is tackling these and problems, but I do have some knowledge on sort of the databases and the marketplaces for reselling this data on the dark web.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And from the perspective of businesses as well, what are the longer term impacts from that if they don't do anything to the point until something happens with a data breach, et cetera?
Well, the data breach, even in countries that don't have rules that are as strict as GDPR, there are legal repercussions for that scale of loss of data. So I think that's some of it. But I mean, the biggest repercussions long term are going to be consumer sentiment. Trust, exactly. Yeah. If I can't trust you to store my data, why would I choose to use you as a service provider, as a business, when there are so many other options out there?
Definitely. It's very easy to switch nowadays, isn't it? And it's super competitive, and that's what businesses need to keep in mind as well.
Exactly.
Making sure the consumer's happy, they can protect their bottom line. But at the end of the day, if they lose trust, they lose the ability to protect the current users that they have. Do you think there's an effective measure for trust and safety on the bottom line of businesses? Can you connect it to, let's say, the customer metrics such as satisfaction, such as retention, lifetime value, that sort of thing? Finding a North Star metric for trust has something I've been trying for years to do, and I have not found it. But even if you don't have a single metric, there are other metrics you can look into. I mean, customer satisfaction, social listening, those are really important tools to be able to understand, how customers are thinking about your business, how much they trust you, and how much that's driving opportunity. I think benchmarking is a really good tool as well. Benchmarking against, similar companies.
And seeing, ideally you want to get a measurement in a score or a way to visualize this without having a major fraud incident. So, seeing the impact it's had on other similar companies is one. But there is no company that is not experiencing some fraud. So you can do things like measure the churn rate of customers who have experienced account takeovers or other types of fraud on your platform versus those who haven't. Similar CSAT in their sentiment around those things. So I think that's very useful tools.
That's really interesting. And from the perspective, let's say Yelp, where you have customer satisfaction, of course, measured maybe by reviews on different businesses, right? And when those reviews are fake, that can also impact massively the trust of other businesses and users which are going on there, right?
Yeah, well, there's two challenges with what Yelp has experienced. One is if businesses think that a lot of the reviews on Yelp are fake and manipulated, they're not going to want to work with Yelp. They're not going to want to advertise, which is a major driver of their revenue. So that directly costs businesses our customers as well as end users. So making sure that the reviews are trustworthy and honest was really important for the revenue strategy. And if you're not getting a lot of reviews, then it's sort of a useless tool for people to use. So customers aren't going to add or users aren't going to add reviews or bother reviewing businesses on a platform where they think 50% of the content on there is fake.
Got it. Okay. And you didn't have AI back then as well to deal with all
We had very basic machine learning that was simple if-then formulas.
Definitely. But AI is now a big factor when it comes to automating a lot of the decision-making, right? And spotting certain vectors of fraud, which the human eye or human error would get into the way of, right? Research from Forbes as well, that we found 79% of Brits are using AI tools now in the workplace. What is AI doing to the fraud prevention landscape on a, let's say, bird's eye view scale? Is it making your job easier and, let's say, your partner's jobs easier? Or is it making it more difficult and giving you less, let's say, transparency?
AI is doing a lot of good. It helps people get up to speed a lot faster. It helps people make their jobs much better in sort of the traditional trust and safety content moderation space. It means that humans have to review far less volumes of sort of that egregious, disturbing content that can leave you traumatized, and that AI can get to it before lots of users can see it. So it's really a really important tool into protecting communities. I mean, you use it a lot at Sumsub, I'm sure, for transaction monitoring. You're able to much more rapidly identify and proactively identify bad actors before they're able to do something bad. But yeah, there's so much things that AI is doing that facilitates bad actors.
Sure.
And there is a degree of needing AI to fight AI, right? When you're talking about generative AI and sort of doctored documents and stuff, AI can actually detect that much easier than a human can. So, I think there's a lot of good. I think overall it is a net good, but there are, of course, some challenges that it presents, like with any major technological advancement.
Most definitely. It's now, of course, if you're looking at some of the documents which are created, it's indistinguishable by the human eye, right? So the only way that you can actually manage to look through and see if they're doctored is utilizing AI. But it's a double-edged sword, as you mentioned. We have to be reactive about it, seeing, of course, new types of fraud images coming through and deep fakes to build solutions which can counteract, of course, the impact there. But the massive effect of AI on democratizing access to targeting people like me and you in our day-to-day lives is it's getting out of hand, right? I mean, the absolute numbers aren't as massive as the exponential scale of the growth of the issue, but we do see it's a massive problem at hand.
It is, yeah. And I think so much of the rise in the growth of fraud, and in particular successful fraud, can very much be attributed in large part to AI.
Most definitely. And if you were to look ahead now and you had, let's say, a crystal ball, right? Here's the question. What new fraud trends would you imagine fraud leaders need to be watching out for, right? How would you be able to prepare them for those types of fraud trends? I
think they're going to just get more targeted and sophisticated. I think it's going to be a lot easier to spoof legitimate business emails, legitimate business phones. I think when you get those robocalls that are obviously very fake from HMRC, those are going to get more sophisticated and sound like you're talking to a real human. So it's going to get so much harder for us to determine what is fake. Those of us who know a bit of fraud and can, kind of giggle at a phishing attempt or some sort of a text that's obviously fake. I think those are going to get a lot harder to detect.
Most definitely. But you're seeing Revolut and these other banking apps, which are really cool, basically integrating it directly into their native apps, right? So unless you're getting a call within the app, you're not speaking to Revolut. And I think that's a good sentiment to send to your consumers or customers as well.
Exactly. I think that's a very good way to approach it.
Definitely. And we said we wanted to be optimistic in this episode, or at least I did as well. What are you optimistic about in the future? Because we are talking about trends in a holistic way and how they're going to damage our everyday lives, but there's a lot of good as well.
We talked about AI and insecurity measures adding friction to the system, but there's so many ways it's going to take things out and simplify things and make it easier and democratize sort of platforms. And in the payment services, I think it's going to make things a lot faster, make things more instantaneous, take some of the friction out of the system. I'm an American. I have financial accounts in the US. I have accounts in the UK. And right now it's really hard for me to access both of those. But I think with AI and the way things are changing, it will facilitate that global economy a lot more. And, I'm certainly not the only immigrant with that problem. I see a lot of opportunities for it to make things easier for people.
We're seeing the application there already. There's quite a few things on a daily basis, and I'm sure to find out with ChatGPT how it's going to help me with my emails. That's for sure. I would like to sort of walk back a little bit as well, just around the ethical considerations, because there's so much good that it's going to do, and there's so many bad actors that do want to use it for bad. And of course, we know which side we're on. But from your perspective, what are the ethical considerations in scaling this safety tech of AI, right? Where do we draw the lines in the battle against fraud?
When the machines become the humans.
Exactly.
I think the biggest ethical consideration is more about making sure you're not losing sight of your business. It feels very appealing. It's certainly financially appealing to sort of turn everything over to a machine. But
makes it easier, right?
It does make it until it doesn't. But I think making sure you don't lose sight of what's actually happening, what's happening behind the screens, what's happening behind the ones and the zeros. This is already required from a regulatory standpoint, is making sure that you can speak to strongly and improve the quality of your AI. But I think that's going to be a challenge long term as it gets more sophisticated and it gets significantly faster than people. You're going to have AI QA in your AI, and then it becomes a little bit of a black hole.
Definitely the case. So you think it should always be a hybrid approach, where we're utilizing it as a tool, but not utilize it. Well, we're not at its behest, right? For every decision.
I think human in the loop always needs to be a component. Maybe not human in the loop, but the large, thousands of people across the globe doing, transactional work. But there do need to be a human eyes on it at all times, I think.
Okay. Is there any way to measure the business value of AI's impact from Telus Digital's perspective against the fight against fraud?
There's a lot of different ways to do it. We have historically been sort of a people shop, providing people to be able to do, high volume transactional processes, and AI is coming and taking that. So the cost savings from not having to have the scale of a human workforce that you've had to previously is a big measurement. Increased quality and increased accuracy, increased efficiency, getting ahead of issues. All of those things are key data points that we find executives looking at.
But those are definitely all very key data points as well. And we looked at trends in trust and safety and the impacts, let's say, the future of fintech frauds. But on the innovation on the digital identity, what would you say around real-time signals as a major contributor for, of course, less friction for the consumer, but also better insights for fraudsters and their activities as well?
I mean, there's massive value in that. It reduces friction. It reduces friction in the system. It gets transactions happening immediately. People don't have to wait. And if they're not waiting, you're not risking churn, and you're also reducing the risk of fraudulent transactions or bad actors being able to successfully, commit fraud. I mean, I think when you're looking at the changing demographic of consumers, Gen Z in particular, it's a society of instant gratification. So if they can't get what they want immediately. And I'm not Gen Z, but I also relate to this. You're going to find a different alternative, and you're probably not going to go back. So there's a little bit of losing out on opportunity there as well. Yeah,
you can lose a lot of customers there.
I actually think that's a huge problem with banking, especially some of the online banks. If a customer wants to set up a bank, they might try 3 or 4 different online options, and whatever one they can get through their system, their KYC system first, is the one they're going to end up banking with.
It naturally incentivizes the bank to make it as quick as possible, right?
It does.
Which can be an issue.
Can create risk, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, friction and also making sure it's timeless in terms of the onboarding and easy is super difficult. What would be your main suggestions for anyone listening here today?
Separation of church and state.
Okay.
Any individuals who are measured by their performance based on customer satisfaction, or any individuals who are incentivized by commission should not be validating individuals from a security perspective. It happens in bank branches all the time. Somebody comes in, they're trying to take out a product, take out a loan, open an account, and the branch attendant is the person that's verifying their ID and their other documents and whether or not they're valid, but that person is also getting commission from selling that product.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of a conflict of interest there, and the same thing happens online if you're calling in trying to a customer support team and you need them to verify your identity. They're measured based on CSAT. I'm not going to be happy with somebody. You won't get a good CSAT score if you don't open an account from me, right? So there's a big disincentivization if you have a little bit of that conflict of interest. So I think that is one of the most important things that businesses can do. And I'm actually a little bit surprised that it isn't standard practice across the board.
It's really interesting to me. And of course, that we're talking about banking on the consumer side, right? You're creating, let's say, cardholder accounts, they're issuing cards, etc. But if we're looking at, let's say, business fraud, where it's business to business and you're servicing B2B, are we looking at the same sort of conditions here as well?
Yeah, I would say so, right? You have, I think with B2B at least, the onboarding times are generally a little bit longer for your KYB checks. But it absolutely shouldn't be done by the same people that are going to be benefiting one way or another, whether it's from their performance score or commission.
That makes a lot of sense. Wow. Before we end all of these podcasts, by the way, we often have something called quickfire questions. You might have seen them before. Yes. So we have 5 quickfire questions where I'm going to sort of rattle them off to you and you can give your best answer as well. What do you think?
I'll give it a go.
Amazing. When choosing a digital wallet, do you go for more features or better security?
Better security.
Excellent. What's one thing about fraud that still surprises you even after all of your experience across the board?
How successful some of the older, poorly thought out, badly typed email type fraud scams are.
They should use ChatGPT.
They should use ChatGPT.
They would be better at it. Yeah, that's for sure. Have you ever been a victim of fraud yourself?
I mentioned I've been impacted by data breaches, but I have not, at least to my knowledge, been a victim of fraud, but that doesn't mean it hasn't happened. You
always preface this with yet. Right? Yeah. What's one habit that you rely on to stay safe online? Two-factor authentication, of course.
Yeah. A keychain. Keeping all of my passwords in a keychain, I think, is really important.
That's excellent. Yeah. If you could have one other career, or any other career rather, than the one you're currently in, what would it be?
A podcaster.
Still, absolutely.
Probably a zoologist. I love animals, yeah.
Amazing. What animals do you have for our audience sake?
I've got 2 cats and a dog, and I don't own a horse yet, but I'm a big horse person.
Amazing to hear.
So insane is, I think, the other term for me.
Dr. Doolittle, yeah. That's amazing as well. I only have a dog, so yeah. But cats can be a little bit more independent, can't they? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we have KYC, Know Your Cats, here today. What's one thing that you would say to the audience listening to What the Fraud now, if they are looking out to stay safe online and make sure that they aren't going to be targeted by any criminals?
Trust your gut. If there's something that seems off to you, don't input your data. You're probably right. And report fraud or suspected fraud when you see it. Pretty much every major company has a phishing@companyname.com. Send those on. I think those are it's really important to make sure that they're tracking and understanding how widespread some of those issues are.
Most definitely. And that leads to the underreporting if, of course, everyone here today doesn't listen to your wise words, of course. But thank you so much, by the way, for joining us on What the Fraud. It's been great to speak with you and really gotten quite a few insights from your side and looking forward to our partnership together. Yeah,
thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of What the Fraud. On the next episode, we're looking at the world of transportation fraud and how identity fraud, money laundering, and cyber risks are reshaping the mobility landscape, from car rentals and leasing schemes to connected vehicles. Our amazing guest will explain how criminals exploit modern vehicle services and what the industry must do to stay ahead. Calling all listeners, we need your support, so please hit that follow button on your favorite podcast platform. And of course, if this episode left you feeling empowered, drop a review. It helps other individuals trying to dodge the digital tricksters. So let's cut the small talk and get down to business. Follow, comment, review, you know the drill. And if you want to hear more about what we are doing at Sumsub and how your business can actually benefit from our verification services, definitely check out our website at www.sumsub.com and subscribe to all of our socials. What the Fraud is a Listen production. The producer is Adrian Bradley and the executive producer is Nick Minter. And the producer from Sumsub is Mila Varavina. Stay safe and see you on the next one.